Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us for another week of Education Matters. This week, we have a special guest, also Mr. Attorney Ted Comstock of the New Hampshire School Boards Association, and he'll be bringing us information about local control of our school boards and of our districts or SAUs. And we also have Doris Hohensee, which is the chair of the New Hampshire Families for Education, and she comes with a wealth of information on this topic. So there, Mr. Comstock, would you like to kind of open up the show here and maybe give some remarks that you came with, some information?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I just wanted to start by telling the viewers and you a little bit about the New Hampshire School Boards Association. You mentioned local control, local governance. The New Hampshire School Boards Association's sole and only mission is to promote local control through elected school boards. So our members are the 175 or so elected school boards in the state of New Hampshire. And what the New Hampshire School Boards Association does for its members is to provide training. I would invite people to go to our website, www.nhsba.org, and there you'll see all the services that we provide, including training. Today I was working on the training academy, as we call it, for next year. And we try to do everything that we can to make sure that school boards are fully equipped to discharge their duties effectively at the local level. And that's such things as knowing what their job is, knowing what the superintendent's job is, knowing how to properly evaluate the superintendent, what the role in hiring and firing is, how to promote budgets effectively at the local level, community engagement, how to make sure that parents are fully involved in decisions that the school board makes. We also have a legislative arm which represents our members at the State House and at the federal government level, and we do superintendent searches and a variety of other things I'm sure I've forgotten. But our overriding mission per our resolutions, which are adopted annually, is to make sure that our wonderful system of local governance in New Hampshire is promoted and protected. Because one of the things that's concerned me in the past several years, not just in New Hampshire but other places and at the federal level, is what I characterize and others have characterized as the federal and state intrusion into local governance. And we do our level best to make sure that local communities through their school boards have a voice in making sure that the decisions that are most appropriately left at the local level stay at the local level.
I'm wondering how much is actually left at the local level. I mean, we're told, oh, well, we're only a policy-making board, the school boards now.
Well, unfortunately, from our perspective, the prerogatives of the local school boards is shrinking all the time. We believe, and if you look at the rules of the Department of Education under which we operate duties of school boards, it's quite a list, and it defines the school board role as a policy-making role. Now, not just the individual policies that we adopt, but also the direction of the local school district. And as an example of what I consider to be the intrusion into local control, I've been around in New Hampshire with the association for quite a little while. And I remember back when the legislature wanted to adopt a law that we believed infringed inappropriately on local school boards, that we would say that's really a matter of local governance, and that's something that local school districts ought to consider, and then if appropriate adopt a policy that works for them. And for many years that worked very nicely, but then there was an evolution and it didn't work so well, because the legislature wanted to, put more of a finger, I guess, on local school boards. And so then they said, okay, you say you'll adopt a policy. Well, we're not sure everybody has adopted a policy, so we're going to make it a legal requirement that you adopt policies in these given areas. To the tune now, there between state and federal law, there are something like 50 to 60 local school board policies that are required by either state or federal law. Now, the evolution went another step forward. It went from leaving it to the local school board to adopt the policy to the legislature saying you must adopt a policy, and then more recently the legislature said you must adopt a policy, and in your policy you must have these things. And there are several examples of that where there is really nothing left for the local school board to adopt because it's all regulated
Right.
by
And
what
so
the
that's why
state requires.
they say, well, you know, we need more local control and not just bus routes.
Right. It's those teacher evaluation policies that are now the forefront of the push to make sure that the assessment, the performance, student performance on the assessments is now a percentage of the teacher evaluations.
Right.
That was the most recent policy pushed.
And at the association, we were very concerned. That was part of the waiver process, as you
Right.
probably know. And we expressed a lot of concern about what that teacher evaluation model was going to look like, whether it was going to be mandated at the local level. And try as we might, we didn't really get definitive answers. And so we continue to be concerned about that because there's a word in there that really troubles us, and and I'm talking about the teacher evaluation,
Right.
that essentially says that the evaluations at the local level, the system, has to be in line with the state model, whatever that state model
And they
may
gave
be.
a state model. They made explicitly this, there's a state policy, and if you don't want to develop your own system, which is tedious or cumbersome, you just take the state model, which I know Manchester just recently did.
Well, we're concerned about what that word align means, and we have tried to be very diplomatic in inquiring with the Department of Education about what that means, and we've not gotten an answer to date. And our concern is, well, what happens if the local board, through its own process, develops what it believes to be a very effective evaluation procedure, and somehow that doesn't align with the state model?
Right.
What's going to happen then? Is the state going to come in and mandate that model? They say no, and I hope that's true. But again, it's of concern to us.
And the school boards, the members themselves are very afraid for breaking the law, so they're intimidated by a lot of these statutes that mandate things, and they try to be good school board members, and they fall in line rather than do what they think is right for the children, and I've seen that.
I think they're overwhelmed. I'm not sure I would say intimidated, but they're certainly overwhelmed because there is a volume of state statutes. I should have brought my state statute education law book, but it's about like this. It's about 1,000 pages long, and the state regulations on education and the federal regulations on education are several times that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the School Boards Association does is orient our newest members after they're elected in March, and we have a couple of sessions to do that, to try to help them navigate through all of these things. And of course, that's hard to do in a couple of 3 hours. But it's the role of law, and I say this as a lawyer, the role of law in public education has become overwhelming. So if you're sitting as a locally elected school board member and operating in good faith, as all of them do, you're just, maybe intimidated is the right word, you're intimidated by the volume of things that you need to know about and need to do. And it's hard to keep up with it all.
They could break the law, actually, if they tried to
Sometimes,
vote
sometimes
for
they
certain
can
things.
be contrary to the law without even knowing it.
And then what happens?
Well,
Are they corrected and they have to reverse what they voted on, let's say?
Well, Nashua wanted to delay the Smarter Balance assessments for 2 years. And they were told by their superintendent, you need a legal brief before, a legal opinion before you proceed, or he encouraged them. So they got that, and then they felt like they could not proceed. They knew that the assessments were inappropriate for their children. They wanted to wait a year or two to get the Common Core more into the school district and get the students ready for the assessment so it wouldn't be a complete failure. And they wanted 2 years more delay. And they felt, even though they thought that was the appropriate thing to do, that they couldn't do it because of this legal brief that said that we're mandated to do these assessments even though the assessments aren't fully validated. So they're really in a tough spot. They don't know how to protect the students.
It is a very tough spot, and this sounds very self-serving for me to say this as executive director of the School Boards Association, but the local school board and the local school board member is in a very tough spot for all the reasons we've just articulated. It's just a very tough, often thankless job. It pays little or nothing. So people that run for school boards are good faith individuals that really care about education in their communities. And our concern at the association level is more and more of that decision-making is being taken away from them. They don't understand necessarily why and how that's happening, but they're asked to implement it back at the local level. And then you get into the kind of things that you just talked about. And particularly with new law, you know, you get two lawyers in a room, and I say this again as a lawyer, there are obviously differences of opinion about what a law means, how it applies, and so forth. So, and then you add the political overlay on all of this with Common Core and other things. Then you really find yourself in a conundrum of hard choices.
Yeah.
So now what do we do?
So what do you recommend going forward? Do you think that we need legislation to be removed, legislation to be added, parents to be more involved? What's your solution?
I think probably a mix of all of that would be my guess. I don't think there's probably, like with most complicated things, I don't think there's probably one fix that's going to work for everything. I do think the legislature would do well to give more control back to local school boards, to trust local school boards, to trust local community people. That's been a strength of our education system forever. And we see the education system really being nationalized more than it ever has been in the past. And education, if you read the history of education, public education in the country, you'll see that it started at the local level.
Yeah.
That was the genesis of where local education started. Then the state role, you know, took a rise because of funding issues, but the federal presence in education historically has been relatively minor. But there are now a lot of things that would suggest to you that it's not minor. You know, No Child Left Behind obviously was a start of that. The Education and Secondary Education Act, special education, you can name, you know, several others that are very high impact federal statutes that affect school boards at the local level in a very dramatic way. Again, an example, special education. I think everybody realizes that special education for our disabled students has a great role, should be there. But when the Congress passed that statute, it promised local school districts throughout the country that it would be funded at a 40% level. Not only has it never been funded at a 40% level, it struggles to be funded at a 15 to 20% level. I attend a lot of local school district meetings where the board is in front of the room and the public is properly questioning the board about expenditures of one kind or another. And particularly in smaller districts where there are tragic special education cases out of district placements that are very, very expensive. And again, not quarreling with that, but it's a very eye-opening part of the budget. The board, all the board can say is we've done the best we can through administration to ease the cost of this, but we are required by federal law to provide these kind of services. And we can't just say, no, we don't want to do that and cut that out of our budget. So if you cut our budget because you don't like how we've done that, then we're going to have to find the money
somewhere else.
So it's not like it goes away, it just comes from a different source. So that's a dramatic example of how the federal government has really gotten into the fray and not lived up to a long-standing promise. So we're all about, if you're going to have mandates, either from the state or federal government, then to the degree those cost extra money, and they almost always do, then there ought to be prerogative to implement, number one. And number two, the less prerogative, the more money we should receive to make sure that those things get done appropriately. But right now, we're at this very odd place where there's less money, but more mandates.
Right. And we've got another waiver coming in for No Child Left Behind that they're working on, but there's no transparency of that process. There's a letter that we saw that someone wrote to or from the U.S. Department of Education, but the legislature, the people, the school boards, we're not involved with the development of that next waiver. So it's just going to fall out of the sky on us and hopefully not hit too hard. I mean, how do we work moving forward on that?
Well, I think the thing that you can best do is to contact your local legislator, to contact your local school board. we share concerns. We shared concerns about the initial waiver request, and we tried to be as involved as we could. But when we expressed policy reservations or questions about various conditions of the waiver, it was tough sledding. It was tough sledding as far as our involvement goes. And it appeared that decisions were made and policy was thought about, and to the degree there was challenge, even in a diplomatic way, then there was a effort, either intentional or not, I like to think, or not, that we weren't included in the discussion as much as we would have liked to have been. So I'm not trying to advance a conspiracy theory here at all, but I do think we're seeing both at the state level and at the national level a very top-down approach to this,
Right.
which is completely contrary to what the School Boards
Right.
Association stands for.
Because as
And-
parents, we don't feel like we're involved in this at all. I know legislators feel like they've been taken out of the equation. These waivers come in at the last minute. Like a year ago, right before the 2013 waiver, they said in a committee of conference, you need to change the language here and here in order to get our waiver. So they're changing our legislation. There's no dialogue. It's sort of like do this or die. You don't get the money at the last minute. I don't feel like it's a two-way conversation.
I think it tracks the place we find ourselves in state and federal government, and that is a place where if there is split government, Republican Senate, Democratic House, Democratic administration, there's a frustration about not being able to move forward in a way that one of the parties would like. And I think we've seen it at the national level, certainly, where the federal administration has decided, well, we will do what we can by a stroke of a pen.
Yeah.
And for the first time in my lifetime, that has taken on a whole different track than we've ever had before. Because the way I was always taught in school, and particularly in law school, was that separation of powers had a real place. It was a fundamental building block
That is
of
the safety in our country, to have that. And when it doesn't have that, then there starts to be a dictatorship of sorts.
Well, you reflect on race to the top. You reflect on the waiver. All of those things, and I'm talking about from the federal DOE perspective now, all of those things came through administrative edict. The Congress had little or no role in race to the top. That was all Secretary
administrative.
Duncan and the administration. And the way that when that came about, I remember very distinctly meeting with our Department of Education, asking us to write a letter of support. And we had, well, I had an open mind because we wanted to be cooperative.
Right.
And I said, well, what does this entail? What if we support this and you apply for the race to the top money, what strings, if any, are going to be confronted? And the answer is, well, we really don't know, and this is fast-tracked, and we'll find out
After the fact.
And
Who goes into contract law like that?
well,
Especially with the federal
I
government.
tried to very diplomatically say, that's not my nature, that's not my training, to kind of sign on to a major initiative and not knowing what the rules of engagement are before you do that. It just didn't make any sense to me, and I'm concerned.
Did you
about
refrain?
that.
Did you refrain?
Actually, because we want it to be cooperative, we did send a very brief letter. It was, I think, 2 sentences long, of support of that. But because, again, in order to be part of the mix in New Hampshire, given the current climate, in order to be heard, you need to give, a level of support that you can while still trying to protect your main constituent
Getting harder and
wishes.
harder, isn't it?
It is getting harder. And again, I don't want to be seen as besmirching, anybody's motives or questioning anybody's philosophies or anything like that. We have significant policy differences with the DOE in New Hampshire about how governance should occur in New Hampshire. and I know I've said it 2 or 3 times, I'll just say it again.
That's good.
And that is that we believe local governance through community, through school boards, is important. And that's why I wrote the article I did that appears on our front page of our website, talking about the importance of local control. If you click through that, I think there were 5 areas there. If you click through that, you quickly realize that school boards are probably the closest government, as it were, to the people. They're directly accountable. They're directly electable. They are responsible through the budget-making process of education in their districts, and you see them everywhere. You can see them at the grocery store, at the gas station, or on the street, or wherever. And that's why I think it was so effective to have local governance be the stalwart of our system. So I do hope that the representations that the Department of Education makes about local control come to pass in a positive way. We're hopeful that they will. At times we've been concerned that maybe they didn't place the appropriate emphasis on that. They tell us that they are all for local control, and we're going to be hoping and wishing that that happens.
How can citizens help to ensure local control? I mean, attending the state board meetings, is that effective? And what can the average parent do other than...
I think a variety of things. I think as you see things come up that are of concern, you can contact your executive counselor. You can contact your school board member, your local senator. It's become very political.
Yeah.
It's become very, very political, I think both of you know. And the local school boards, again, I think have been overly minimized at the expense of the things we're talking about. And the decisions are made at higher levels. And when the school boards say, let's chat, let's see how this works, because we're ultimately responsible for implementing it at the local level, then if you don't have a role until then it's kind of difficult to kind of backtrack and start over again. I think one of the things I've been thinking about, and I don't know whether this idea has merit, but it has worked in other states, is because so much of what we were talking about has been top down, either national or state, is perhaps it's time to kind of re-examine how our leadership at the DOE is employed, and how the State Board of Education is determined.
Right.
Right now, the system is that the sitting governor, would appoint the Commissioner of Education, and the Commissioner of Education then would serve, I believe, for 2 4-year terms, if memory serves. And the State Board of Education members are also appointed by the governor. It seems to me, whether it be Republican or Democratic governor, that vests a lot of power in the governor's chair. So what some states have done is, I've done a little research on this, is some states actually have the commissioner elected by the people. It's an elected body by the people, as would be the governor and so forth. Some do have it appointed by the governor, and some states have the State Board of Education elected by region within the state, or elected statewide. So I just wonder, in the interest of accountability and getting to the kind of things that you're talking about, whether it would make sense to look at that, to say, well, if the governor gets to appoint the Commissioner of Education, okay, we can accept that. But then maybe the State Board of Education ought to be able to be elected, because that's the voice of the people. For
very short terms, so
perhaps,
they're responsive.
We'd have to look at what would be appropriate. It wasn't so long back that the State Board of Education had the power to hire and fire the commissioner. That's no longer the case. That change was made some years ago.
Oh, wow.
The School Boards Association always supported, and still does support, the State Board of Education being able to hire and fire, if need be, the commissioner.
That would be consistent with the school boards.
It is, and
Right.
that's exactly why we supported it.
It's a good model.
And so we're exploring the possibility of maybe moving forward with something like that, because it brings an accountability, it brings a transparency, because when an official believes that their boss per se is by appointment and not by the people that they sit with
Right.
on a policy level, that changes the dynamic.
Of who they're
And
going to listen to closer to.
so we,
Yeah.
we are exploring that as a possibility. We have a long-time resolution on the books that does say the State Board of Education ought to be the one that hires the commissioner. And
Exactly.
that would be regardless of who sits in the commissioner's chair. It's just, I think, a good policy to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine a situation where a local school board would be told, well, they can't hire their own superintendent.
No.
And that's
no.
the model we're familiar with.
Right.
But what if somebody said, no, that's going to be appointed by
By
The
your
mayor.
X? Yeah, by X.
The mayor.
I don't think that would fly.
No,
and
huh?
So I think it's worth looking at. So
That's a great suggestion and insight that you're bringing to us today. And we have about 2 minutes left, and so we kind of need to just think about that for time.
okay.
And so, well, now what?
No, that's pretty good. That would only take legislation. That wouldn't even take a constitutional amendment. That
Correct.
Just a
Be-
statute.
Because well, that
Could be
would
done quickly.
that would go back to a system the way it was before.
right.
The system
restoring.
was in place to allow the State Board of Education to make those employment decisions, and that was changed so that could be changed back statutorily.
Yeah.
Now, whether there be the political will to do that is obviously another question, but
Right.
we think it's at least worth pursuing.
So that will be one way to help us to
But
gain back our local control of our school
Well,
boards.
I think
and-
I think it could be part of it. I think it could be part of it. I think it's really important that everybody make their voices heard in this process in a respectful and diplomatic way, because local control, sadly, is under attack. I'm convinced of that. And try as we might as an association, we're not nearly as successful at sort of heading that off as if we would have a groundswell of parents supporting that. And
Oh,
that's one of
great.
the reasons I'm here today, is to ask for your support in helping us on that, because while we may have some differences on things, I think at a core level, we do believe that local control is a virtue and that we should support that.
Exactly.
Any way to restore local control is the model to go, rather than try something new and experimental, and go back to what works.
And it's worked for centuries.
Yes.
Well, the school districts and the SAUs, if they don't want to have Smarter Balance as their test, they shouldn't have to have it.
That's a
But
separate
now
issue.
we're being told you don't have the local prerogative to choose.
Parents can refuse. That's their only option, individually.
But parents
as
don't like to be obstinate to the school district
No.
and what's going on with programs. So now we're in a predicament and we have to refuse.
Well, if I could, I know
Yeah,
we're
half
running
a
short.
minute left.
We're running short on time, but I know one of the things relative to Smarter Balance is that there was a lot of controversy about the use of that, still is, and it was said, well, you don't need to do that, but there really wasn't an alternative for
No.
a long time. So that's how you were going to be measured, and you didn't have to use that particular process, but then there wasn't another process
And
to
there's
use.
no public hearing. It's just pushed down.
And if you don't take it, you don't get the money. I think we'll have to end on that note.
Right.
Thank
all
you.
about the money.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mr. Comstock, for
My pleasure
joining
to be
us today
here.
on
Thank you.
Education Matters.
Thank you.
And Doris from New Hampshire Families for Education. All right, well, thank you, folks. We'll see you next time on Education Matters. Take care.